Trails of Cold Steel 3, man. This game was something special. This was the only game in the franchise that I had expectations going into, and they just completely shattered them 10 times over, and then some, and then some. Just like over and over again. I was so surprised when I played this game. I want to get right into talking about it, so let's just get into it. So spoiler warning as always, Trails of Cold Steel 3 is the culmination of the entire series leading up to it, so I can't really segment the spoilers from the rest of the series at the end of the video like I typically do. So this time there will be full series spoilers leading up to Trails of Cold Steel 3. So if you haven't played any games before that, this is your warning. You don't have to leave. I think you should be fine, but I also might be lying to you, so be careful. So a few first impressions. Something I really liked about Cold Steel 3 is that they fixed pretty much every issue I had with Cold Steel 1 and 2 within the first 5 hours. It was very apparent that the writers knew what people didn't like about Cold Steel 1 and 2, and then just tried to subvert their expectations and then go off of it in Cold Steel 3, which I really appreciated. From a graphics and animation standpoint, CS3 is such an improvement from CS1 and 2. Like going back and watching CS1 and 2 gameplay, I can't believe the improvement that they did in the span of like, what, 3 years? It's crazy. I'm sure that not being held back by the Vita and PS3 was a big contributor to this. And the music. Trails of Cold Steel 3, in my opinion, has the best soundtrack in the series since Trails in the Sky the Third. The series has always had really good music, but they really showed out with Trails of Cold Steel 3 in my opinion. I added 90% of the soundtrack to all my playlists. My two favorite songs from this soundtrack are Genial and Balmy and Things Entrusted. Those two tracks, beautiful. So let's talk about the actual hook of the game. So starting the game off with a bunch of characters we don't know being taught underneath Rin was very interesting to me because I had no idea about New Class 7. The only expectations I had going into this game was that there was a time skip, but I didn't know anything else aside from that. I actually stayed blind as much as possible on a lot of the time skip redesigns, so I couldn't see, if anyone had any crazy powers or anything like that. And I feel like that was kind of ruined by the hook of the game, because by the end of this little segment, we see a bunch of the old Class 7 members show up, and we get to see every single time skip design. So I was like, okay, I stayed blind on this just for it to be ruined at the very beginning. I'm definitely not tripping about this, because I ended up not really caring about old Class 7 by the end of the game. I actually really cared about New Class 7 a lot more than Old Class 7. In the end, this really didn't matter, but this was something I definitely held against the game for a while. But overall, I really enjoyed the time skip and how they treated their characters. I actually stopped making this video to make a completely different video while I was still writing the script for this, because I feel like this is one of the only games that actually ages its characters from like high school to working class age. I think that's honestly one of my favorite aspects of Cold Steel 3, is just that fact alone. But the real scene that set the tone for this entire game and completely blew me away in terms of my expectations is whenever Rin is in the freight car and he goes and talks to Valimar and he turns around and he sees a Gate and Tita sitting there just talking to each other. Like, that's so crazy. I was not expecting that. I literally gasped when I saw that. Like, that's so crazy to me. And that really just set the tone for the rest of the game, because I knew that this was going to be the culmination. But the fact that this started right here, right now, I can't even speak straight. The fact that this just started here is just so telling of what they were aiming for, and then they delivered, and they kept delivering the entire game. Like that alone, that little set piece, amazing, amazing. We meet Toe after this, and best girl, you already know. But after this, we meet Randy, which is crazy because not only do they introduce characters from the Liberal and the Sky arc, Randy's here and he's teaching. This was one of the few things I knew coming in, but that still blew me away because I wasn't expecting them to introduce this early and for him to just be here. Like, this dude was moving in the background. And on top of that, Aurelia is the principal. All of these characters that were in different roles in the series are just in different roles here, which I really like because it really shakes things up in terms of what I thought I knew and what I was expecting, because I didn't know what to expect at this point. Everything I knew coming into this game had already been put on the table. I had no expectations for this game after this. As I said before, the writers really did a good job of taking what I didn't like about CS1 and 2 and really improved on it in CS3. So my big issue with CS1 and 2 was that Old Class 7 really felt like they didn't talk to each other while they were just chilling. Like, I made an example of Fee and Gaius talking together and I couldn't see them having an actual conversation. Reducing the number of Class 7 members from 11 to just 3 was a great idea in my opinion. It was pretty much immediately apparent that they wanted to fix this with New Class 7, and I saw this immediately and I was so surprised. And they left a really good first impression on me as characters as well. Kurt was a character that I didn't really have an initial impression on, but the fact that he was a Vander surprised me, and it really connected that aspect of the world to the military academy and to the player, which I really enjoyed. I like how they executed that, but the fact that he's living underneath the shadow of someone we know, Mueller, was just great overall. And I love how this series is not afraid to influence characters with other characters. So like, for example, Kurt and Mueller is an obvious one, but the next one is Yuna and Lloyd, which completely surprised me. So Yuna is from Crossbell, and specifically the Crossbell Police Academy, which immediately told me Lloyd, which was cool, and I was not expecting that at all. I saw that she had Lloyd's tonfas in like the box art, so that already intrigued me, but just knowing how much Lloyd influenced her and seeing that was amazing. Because, okay, you know what, let's have a Yuna analysis video, because I have so much love for this character. So Yuna being a fangirl of Lloyd right off the bat was great in my opinion, because I'm a big Lloyd fanboy, and Yuna being a fangirl just felt like a self-insert, so I really resonated with this character already. But one of the biggest issues that I had with Cold Steel as a whole was that they just almost never talked about people from Crossbell and like their perspective on stuff. We never heard anything from the mouth of anyone in Crossbell, which was kind of the point of that game. But to see someone directly influenced and impacted by someone from Crossbell and what happened in Crossbell and being in the party was just one of the greatest moves that they could have had. And that just immediately told me where they were going with this game once again. And like by this point, everything that I had an issue with was just solved. As I keep saying, I'm going to keep saying it as it comes up. They just solved everything in this game that I had an issue with in CS1 and 2. And as for Altina, I really like Altina as a character, and it was interesting to see her at the end of CS2. She has a little bit more personality now, which is cool. I don't really have much to say initially about her, but I do love that character a lot. Another thing that I really like about Reen growing up is that he holds onto those stupid ass fake glasses the whole time, and I thought that gave him another layer of personality where he's like, he's not insecure about it, but he's like, I'm just out of spite, I'm going to keep wearing these glasses because you say they look stupid. Like Kurt outright says that they don't look good on him, which gives him, you know, a little bit more personality that I thought he didn't have initially. But giving a character something they really cling on to, even though everyone else thinks it's stupid, is respectable and super funny in my eyes. Like, I never got tired of that gag at all. Something that I really liked about Reen as an instructor in Cold Steel 3 is that he uses lessons that he learned from Cold Steel 1 and 2, and the game shows when he learned them and how he's reinforcing that in his own teaching, especially with instructor Sarah. Like at the end of the Einhell Keep, he gives New Class 7 the same choice that instructor Sarah gave his class in Cold Steel 1, which I thought was really cool. I really like the scene after this where they jump 2 weeks into the future and we see Yuna and Kurt having a conversation about their family, because they both have pretty similar values, and this is really important, as I said, for these characters to interact with each other outside of Reen's eye. That is the most important thing for me, is that Reen doesn't need to be present for them to be able to develop their characters. Also, I forgot to mention that they referenced Elisa and Reen at the beginning of CS1 with Yuna and Kurt, but instead of Elisa holding a grudge against Reen and doing that again, Yuna immediately forgives Kurt, which really just gave me hope that they were willing to accept some of the weaker aspects of the previous entries and just immediately fix them. As I keep saying, I'm going to keep saying this. So it gave me hope for the rest of the game. The start of Chapter 1 takes place 2 weeks after the prologue, which is a mini time skip, which I really appreciated because it allows the characters to get settled in to their day-to-day life, and we don't really have to watch that. I think Cold Steel 1 also did this. But here's the first time we get to see Instructor Reen, and as I'm going to probably keep saying, I really like how they wrote Reen in this game. Just seeing how much he's grown and matured since the ending of Cold Steel 2 was a breath of fresh air to me. One of my biggest issues with Cold Steel 1 and 2 that might have been intentional was that he was really immature, but in those games he was willing to accept his immaturity, which made me think that in this game he was going to become more mature. I rarely see games where the protagonist is like, I'm being immature, and they actually do something about it. So I really appreciate that in retrospect now. Not really, but just a little bit more. Something that I immediately noticed with this game was that in the Crossbell arc, everyone called Randy by his nickname, even in a professional setting such as this one. But in this game, everyone in Erebonia also calls him Randy, with the exception of Reen. And this is obviously because Rean and Lloyd fought at the end of CS2, and Lloyd went and told Randy, hey bro, watch out man, there's this dude named Rean, he's bad. And the two of them mutually understand the fact that they have to work together and talk to each other, but you can still feel the distance between them throughout this chapter, which Rean even points out later. I thought this was super well executed because we know both of these characters. I know that Randy isn't really one to hold a grudge like that, but I also don't know if he's someone to hold a grudge like that because this is Lloyd we're talking about. And I know that Rean is not a very confrontational person, so it was just gonna stay there until one of them, most likely Randy, said something about it. I was really excited to see how this resolved just knowing these character dynamics, and I thought this was well executed. Aurelia and Rean have a conversation later about the Northern War and fill the player in on what happened between CS2 and CS3. I thought this conversation was good because it was believable and it wasn't just, do you remember what happened in the Northern War? Oh yeah, I do. How could I forget? This scene was really believable for a character like Aurelia because she's really just like, yeah man, I'm just kind of here now. This is not what was in the plan, but you know, we vibing. And I really appreciated that. And Rean is just kind of being talked at to an extent, which is kind of funny. I really found this believable and human. Like, this is an actual conversation you might have if something like this happened to you, which I hope wouldn't happen to you. Also, if you didn't know, the gap between CS2 and 3 is being adapted into an anime. I was going to say something about that and how kind of unfulfilling it felt, but hopefully the anime does it justice. I'm not really expecting much, but we'll see. Something that caught me off guard here was how much the world map expanded compared to CS2. We get to see more of Western Erebonia, which is where Olivier and Aurelia were fighting in CS2. I could see on the world map some of the field missions where our classmates went in CS1 and 2, and I figured that we were eventually going to go there ourselves, which made me excited. We get to interact with some of the other students at this point, and I really enjoyed them because they have very distinct personalities, and we got to see them all interacting with each other, which again was very important for me coming from CS1 and 2. As I was saying earlier, something that I really like about CS3 is that we get to see how much war has impacted people from different backgrounds, which is something I really thought was missing in the first two games. We meet Sandy, and she personally thanks Rean for saving her hometown of Ulster during the Civil War, and she also shows her respect for the old Class 7 similar to the way that Yuna shows her respect to the SSS. I love the scene with Kurt that follows this. So we see Kurt is following the path of Laura throughout the first two games, and that he has tunnel vision on his goal and following his sword training. But here, instead of watching him go through the same path as Laura, Rean gives him the advice and guidance that Laura learned herself and that Rean learned alongside Laura and teaches it to Kurt. This is great writing because it develops both characters on screen while using a character we both know and love as a reference, and it advances Kurt's development so we don't have to watch him go through the exact same path as Laura again. This is followed by a scene between Yuna and Randy. Again, notice how she calls him Randy, which makes sense. I love seeing characters from Crossbell and Liberal interacting with each other because it makes me wonder how much they're going to reveal to Rean or the other characters throughout the game. In this scene, I was waiting for either of them to talk about Lloyd or anything really happening in Crossbell, and it really kept me engaged in the conversations being held. I was constantly visualizing every conversation in Cold Steel 3 as a sort of affinity tree, trying to see how everyone in the story was connected and what information or stories they could potentially tell each other. This was pretty much the highlight of the game. So this is the strongest point of the game, and I loved it. I ate it up. Something I appreciated about the conversation with Ash is just how aggressive Ash is towards Rean working for the government. He constantly calls Rean the government's lapdog, to which Rean doesn't ever admit nor deny. He's just kind of like, yeah. From what I remember, no one's ever really said that to Rean's face, so I really appreciate Ash's character. On top of that, throughout this chapter, we see that Ash has a rebellious demeanor, but never actually causes trouble or does anything wrong, which is an archetype I really like in stories. We also meet Muse here, which was the only character from Cold Steel 3 that I knew about through memes. She has a reputation, I guess you could say. But my only question at this point about her was, who did she hear all these stories about Rean from? In retrospect, it's pretty obvious, but I didn't make that connection until later in the story. We also find Jingo here from Crossbell, which made me happy because I really like Jingo and her relationship with her mom. I think that those two characters were some of the funniest characters in the Crossbell arc, so I was happy to see her here as the shopkeeper. Lecter and Milliam reunite with us, and we find out that Zephyr, Ouroboros, and the Red Constellation are making moves again. This scene was cool because of the backgrounds of every single person involved in the scene, specifically Randy and Lecter. Milliam joins our party and we take her to meet Altina. I love how whenever Milliam meets Altina, she's really standoffish. It's very relatable in a sense. I kind of do this with people sometimes personally, so I really related with the way Altina reacted to this. The dungeon following this scene really develops both of these characters though, specifically Altina. We find out here that Altina directly compares herself to Millium's growth and reflects on her own growth. Altina is older than Millium and feels that even though they're more or less the same model, she's frustrated that she's behind in terms of life experience and doesn't understand why. Very relatable stuff. I really relate with Altina's character and I like her character a lot. Later that night, we find out that Misty or Vita is still doing a bin time, which I was kind of indifferent to. At this point in the game, I had no idea why they even let her go at the end of CS2, and why they continue to keep her relevant to the plot at this point outside of her ties to Ouroboros and Emma. Knowing what I know now, it was important for her to stay in the story, considering who she's connected to, but I still think that this was kind of jarring for her to show up like this. But maybe I'm just tripping. I'm probably just tripping. The night before we head off to St. Arc, we go and talk to Claire in the train. I was looking forward to see how she talked to Reen in this scene, because at the end of CS2 they implied that she had romantic feelings towards him, which I thought was weird. So I was kind of hoping that they retconned it, and they did in this scene in a way, because here they talk as if they're equals, which I really enjoyed about this, but we'll see later what they do with the romantic aspect of Claire and Reen's relationship. It's also worth noting that Michael comes into the scene after this, and I thought this was weird at the time because Michael doesn't seem like the kind of guy to talk to people privately like that. This was just foreshadowing for what happens between those two later, which I thought was cool in retrospect. An aspect that I really liked about the St. Arc section is that Reen is constantly being reminded of his past experiences in old Class 7 through his experience with guiding new Class 7. We get to see his inner thoughts of what certain things in the present remind him of from the past. And as I've been saying and I'm going to keep saying, I really love this aspect about Cold Steel 3 so much. Like, I love it. It's great. A side quest that completely caught me off guard was the one where you find the lost cat. We end up chasing this cat around St. Arc, and of all people, Shirley from the Crossbell arc shows up and ends up giving us guidance on how to think like a cat in order to find it. I think that this was a direct reference to the Cold Steel 1 or 2, I don't remember, quest where we follow Fee and we do the same thing with Fee. I think this was pretty symbolic of the two characters because Fee and Shirley are both referred to as cats and have cat-like tendencies, so I thought this was funny. But it was also like, I was just like, wait, Shirley's here? Like, oh no, this is not good. From here we go into the forest and Reen has another vision where time stops for everyone but him. Oh wait, this was the first one. I'd said another. Forget I said another. And he sees this girl. She talks about his fate and gives him some kind of power and leaves saying that he's not ready for the truth. The first time I actually played through this and I went back to write, I forgot about this scene, but it is extremely important. When we return to St. Arc, we hear the song Looking Up at the Sky, which one of my favorite Trails songs of all time. Like that is, I think that might be my favorite Trails song. But this is actually a recurring theme throughout the Trails in the Sky arc, which I absolutely love, and it's diegetic this time, which is interesting because I didn't know this song actually existed in the universe. But we later find out that, you know, obviously it's my boy Elliot coming through to play this song. I already knew it was him. I got excited when I heard this. Elliot is one of my favorite characters if you don't know at this point. But seeing Elliot traveling and playing music like he always wanted to it made me smile. I love this scene so much. After going through Parm and finding out that Shirley and Duvally are partnered up, which is crazy in itself, we eventually find some anarchisms, and they force Reen to finally use his spirit unification power for the first time in this game. I appreciate how in this game they actually make it kind of consequential for him to use it, because my biggest issue with Cold Steel 1 and 2 was that Reen was just super overpowered. He had like the spirit unification, he had Valimar, and he had just his sword training, and for some reason he was never strong enough to actually do anything. So I like how they're kind of nerfing him by not allowing him to bring Valimar out, and also not allowing him to just use spirit unification at will. Eventually Laura shows up and saves us after we fight some more anarchisms, and what I loved about this scene, even though I'm not the biggest Laura fan, is that she went up and hugged Reen immediately, which is already a huge step forward in her character development coming from Cold Steel 2, because she wouldn't have done that before. So I'm sure Laura fans were super happy about that, and I'm happy for y'all. Later that night we have a calm before the storm moment with all the characters that we've met up until this point, which was really nice. Duvally and Shirley eventually come and jump the party here. I loved the potential for character interactions here at this point already. Like, this was one of the first villain character interactions that we got to see here. We have Shirley and Randy, obviously. We have Laura and Duvali with their swordplay, and then we have Fee and Shirley as well too. So just all of these interactions that I've been waiting to see are already happening right here and right now, which was amazing, and it had me excited for the rest of the game because there's so many character interactions that I knew were going to get resolved here. So this next scene the following day impressed me so much that I actually took time away from making this video to make a completely separate video on that scene. I'll just let you check that out because I'm not going to recap it here, but this scene just blew me away. I love this scene so much. But after this scene, we get to see Ash and Lecter talking, which I'm already like suspicious, and Lecter tells Ash that things are starting to overlap. And I had a feeling that him and Muse were involved in something greater, and I honestly didn't even know what was going on. Like, I thought they were gonna betray the part. I guess Ash kind of did that. Oops. I felt like Ash and Muse were both a part of something greater. Like, I thought they were a part of the intelligence division after seeing this scene. But I felt like this reveal of them being involved in the grand scheme of things was kind of ruined by them being in the party in the opening sequence of the game, which I already talked about at the beginning of the video. Later, Reen explains how he lost his power of spirit unification, which I appreciated again, because this is the writer's way of nerfing them, as I said earlier. I didn't mind this explanation because, you know, I feel like they backed themselves into a corner by letting Reen get that strong and overpowered. I guess now would be a good time to mention Old Class 7. So the formula of this game is that for the first half of the chapter, we'll use New Class 7, and the second half of the chapter, we'll use Old Class 7. And then at the end of the chapter, you can use everyone that you used in that chapter before. And on top of that, you can use any guest characters that showed up throughout the chapter as well, which I thought was okay, but they started shoehorning in Old Class 7 into the story just because they had to, and that they all needed to be here by the end, which I definitely felt by the second and third chapter. But I liked it here initially before I realized which direction they were going. It also didn't help that they gave me all of my favorite characters in chapter 1. So by this point, the Old Class 7 members that were going to join in chapter 2 and 3 almost didn't matter to me, personally. I feel like over the course of this game, my love for New Class 7 just completely outclassed, no pun intended, Old Class 7. So when I was given the choice, I would always choose New Class 7 over the Old Class 7. And a big part of that is because New Class 7 is actually written to interact with each other. With Old Class 7, I feel like most of the party members were interchangeable relationship-wise, except for maybe, you know, Eustace and Machias and stuff like that. Everyone else I feel like could have been interchangeable because they don't really talk with each other. A good example of this is the following scene that takes place exclusively with New Class 7. Here we get to see their relationships and personal growth without Reen present, which is huge. A big issue, as I said before, with Cold Steel 1 and 2 is that we don't get to see much of Old Class 7 interact with each other outside of Reen's perspective, if at all. So this scene allows Kurt to have a big moment of self-realization and growth while also adding Muse and Ash to their circle. I can tell that they put extra attention and care into these scenes. As we leave Parm, we finally get to see the mystery dude with his jacket on. And as soon as I realized that he was the leader of Zephyr, Rutger, I was like, wait, I knew it. I was waiting to see him because I remembered in CS2, Xeno said that they were bringing the boss back. So as soon as I saw that, I realized that this was the boss. But then the craziest thing that they could have done at the very beginning of this game happens, and we end up going to Hamel of all places, which I'm just like screaming because I'm like, wait, really? Like, we're actually going here? The fact that they pulled this out so early in the game just blew my mind. I didn't know what to expect for the rest of this game at this point if they were starting with this. And since Agate's here, he gets to tell us the truth of the genocide of Hamel in the 100 Days War, which just completely recontextualizes what happened there. Which, crazy. Crazy. I don't even know what to say at that point. But being able to actually walk around and see this place after the buildup of all these games and knowing the effects of what took place here was just such a great payoff. But right before this, they foreshadowed that there were 2 flowers missing from like this random flower bed. And I was like, wait, 2 flowers? That has to be Estelle and Joshua here. We're about to meet Estelle and Joshua. And I'm not gonna lie, that was my motivator for this. Not like the entire reason I played this game, but that was what I was looking forward to the most in this game. And sadly, we never saw them. We saw them in a flashback, but it just makes me all the more excited for CS4, just because I know they come back. But because that was my expectation, this next scene hit even harder because I didn't expect Shirley and Duvali to be at Lei Wei's grave, even though it made perfect sense. I was already caught off guard because I was unsure of who was here and what was about to go down, but I immediately knew after seeing them, on top of Zephyr and new Class 7 trailing, that there was something serious about to go down. Like, just the amount of people that were about to show up for this fight was crazy. But the fact that Dooley and Shirley calmly allowed the party to pay their respects on top of that, just, man. I was like, bro, it's about to go down at this point, because when villains start doing stuff like that, that's some Hunter x Hunter stuff. Like, when villains are like, go ahead, just pay your respects. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's about to go down. But after we all pay our respects, Dooley and Shirley are like, okay, where are we gonna fight? And then Rian's just like, it don't matter, bro, we ready. I was like, yes, sir, yes, sir. And then like they start fighting, and we get to see the like, it's crazy because the party dynamic here is Fee versus Shirley and Dooley and Laura, like I said earlier. So we already get 2 payoffs here in this one fight, and it's already pretty difficult because we know how strong they are individually from the past games, but fighting them together was actually very difficult this early on. I think I had to try it twice, I don't remember. After this, Rutger and his Divine Knight are formally introduced, which is crazy in itself because like now we know that there's other Divine Knights and pilots that exist in this world besides Valimar and Reen. Fee finally gets to meet Rutger after all this time, and I thought this scene was weird because I know Fee isn't a character that ever reacts emotionally to stuff, but I feel like this should have been the scene where Fee started breaking down and crying or something like that, because she barely reacted to seeing the one person she trusted come back to life. And I was pretty disappointed in seeing this. Like, she had I feel like she didn't have any kind of drive after this scene. It felt weird to see that, where she's just like, okay, I gotta get stronger. I'm like, oh, that's your dad. Like, he should probably be a little bit more emotional here. At the end of this fight, we get to see the entire class and faculty of whatever their school's name is pay their respects to Lei Wei's grave, which was just an amazing scene overall. And it really just shows how much of a legend of heroes trails in the sky. Okay, that was terrible. But I really appreciate how this game shows us what the world's perspective is on the characters we've played as or against in previous games. Because the gate is seen as a legendary bracer to the people in Erebonia, and they speak of Lloyd in the same vein in terms of Crossbow. And I really appreciate seeing these different perspectives of characters we know and love. Olivier is a perfect example of this as well. I love this scene after this where Rian scolds his students for disobeying his orders because the old Class 7 members are listening in and they're like, but didn't you do the exact same thing in Cold Steel 1 and 2? And they just clown him for being hypocritical. I really like how the writers are able to poke fun at characters like this. Meanwhile, Randy and Ash are having the same conversation, which Ash casually ignores in true Ash fashion. But what I didn't realize is that this scene was foreshadowing Ash being from Hamel. Ash leaves specifically when Randy asked, how'd you even find this place? Which got past me because I thought Ash was trying to avoid the whole conversation instead of just that specific question. Even the part about him trying to get closure on that day 14 years ago got past me. Tita and Agate placing flowers from Estelle, Joshua, and Ren had to be cheering, but the camera pans out to Muse standing isolated from everyone as usual. And I was like, okay, yeah, you gotta be like some kind of undercover Ouroboros member or member of the intelligence division or something. She's acting suspicious. I honestly still don't know what she was thinking in this scene. Overall, the first chapter completely blew me away. It just set the tone and energy that the writers were going for every character interaction and payoff for the rest of the game. And I was completely sold. I was actually so sold on these payoffs that I forgot that this was a setup game for Cold Steel 4. So the fact that I was getting all this payoff in a setup game, it's just like, what is going on right now? Like, this game is amazing. Chapter 2 begins and we see Elise and Alphen, which is whatever, but then we see Elisa at her executive big boss Rhineford Corporation job, which is amazing. As I said before, and I'm gonna, okay, y'all know at this point, I love how they age, like blah blah blah, you know. But then we see her go into her office and we see her talking to someone on the computer. And I'm like, who is she talking to? The camera pans out and reveals that Elisa's talking to Tio of all people. And I don't know if y'all know, but Tio is one of my favorite characters. Like, she used to be my Avi on this YouTube channel a while back too. So I was screaming by this point, but it got even better. But it got worse before, because after this scene, they show Emma. And Y'all know how I feel about Emma. I'm going to get into it. I'm not even gonna lie to y'all. I'm gonna get into it later in the video. But we see Emma doing this thing, and after that scene, the chapter title shows up. And this chapter title had me, I jumped out of my seat when I saw this. The chapter title for chapter 2 is Conflict and Crossbow. The one thing I knew about this game was that we were going back to Crossbow. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is the chapter where we actually go back to Crossbow, because they just showed Tio, like, we're going to Crossbow this chapter. The fact that this happens this early on in the game was just ridiculous to me. Like, I, again, had no idea what to expect after this point. After the title card, we get to see the Thor students interacting with each other, and I really like this because they separated the guys and the girls this time around, which was something that they rarely did in Cold Steel 1 and 2. Something that I found hilarious was finding Tatiana and Ash, of all people, together reading for the reading club. And Ash is just like, yeah, I like to read, so what, bro? Get out of my face, bro. It's really a pain in the ass. But I love Ash's character and how he just subverts expectations, and he's really just like trying to be tough, but he's like really compassionate. I think here's also a good time to talk about Vantage Master. So if there's a card game in a JRPG, unless it's FF9, I'm gonna play it. Like, I love Triple Triad and everything, so I was glad to see that this one was really good. I enjoyed building the deck up and finding new cards, but the difficulty never really ramped up until the last 2 challenges, and even then I really only struggled due to my own impatience and aggressiveness. My strategy never really changed outside of like 1 or 2 matches, but I hope it gets improved in CS4 because I really enjoyed playing it in this game. Later that evening, there's a great scene between Randy and Reen. So Randy invites Reen out for drinks, and they end up talking about their past. More importantly, Randy speaks about what Lloyd said about Reen and his impression of him. Lloyd said he's someone who's dignified and honorable, yet sad. And I was like, yeah, that's Reen. This was important because we know that Reen and Lloyd had some kind of mutual respect for each other after the fight at the end of CS2. But I didn't know to what extent and what they would express to their friends and allies, especially since Randy had this kind of social barrier up when it came to interacting with Reen. Reen tells Randy that he reminds him of Crow too, which kind of surprised me because like he's like, yeah, you remind me of my boyfriend. He's like, what? Nothing. At the end of the conversation, they mutually agree to address each other on a first name basis, which had me smiling because I thought there was going to be a conflict between the two of them based on their initial interactions. So I thought that they were going to have a falling out like as teachers, which would have been interesting to see, but I'm glad it ended up playing out this way. On the topic of bonding, one of my few gripes with this game is how they limited half of the old Class 7 bonding events being carried out through exploring the equivalent of the old schoolhouse. I really dreaded doing these and they felt super forced, but I understand why they did them this way. I will say the way that Reen was like, hey, do you want to look around this branch campus? You haven't been here before, is pretty natural for Reen to do. I just hate how everyone is like, yeah, I want to train in that facility when they come through. Like, why would you do that? Just relax. You don't have to fight every time you go out here. A minor world building detail that I really appreciated as a fan of Trails in the Sky is that Tita mentions that acerbic tomatoes were created as ZCF, which is a reference to a side quest in the original Trails in the Sky FC, which I really love that. I was like, wait, I know about, we did that, Estelle did that. This same day, we have the option to fight Aurelia, and this is optional, but I am a completionist, unfortunately, so I refused to lose this fight, and I ended up spending a whole hour trying to min-max in order to beat her. It was an equally fun and frustrating experience because I actually like being challenged by these games. I definitely think that this is one of the hardest fights in the series. I struggle with this fight more than anything in the rest of the series, including Ari and Rod and Azure, so I was struggling. To take a break from this fight, I went to go see Josette again, which definitely had me cheering once again, as I did a lot in this chapter. But we get to see a little follow-up on her family's story, and afterwards she said that she was the one that brought Agate and Tita over to Crossbow, which was a nice bit of world building too. Cedric comes in and we find out that he's taken Olivier's position while also being a student at the academy himself. I didn't have a strong opinion on Cedric after CS2, but in retrospect they did a good job with his character after the events of the game. Cedric blames the events of CS1 and 2 and even Crow's death on his own weakness, so he wants to become a strong leader. I can definitely understand why he did what he did in this game. But obviously, if Cedric wants to be strong, he needs strong people. Because of this, he asks Reen to join him at the main campus, to which Reen obviously declines due to the bond he's built with his students. And this obviously pisses Cedric off. Kurt and New Class 7 enter the scene and we see the first interaction between him and Cedric since the Vanders were dismissed from the royal family. Cedric then switches to being super cocky, which while playing this I really dislike, but now I understand his character a little bit more and I appreciate it. Cedric is faking his confidence and almost abusing his role as prince as soon as he doesn't get what he wants and he starts feeling weak, which I understand. Later that night, Rena and the other instructors are briefed on the field mission in Crossbell only to be met with bad news for Randy. Because Randy is obviously from Crossbell and the political situation surrounding him and the SSS is tense, he's banned from stepping foot into Crossbell himself. And I actually yelled at my screen when I saw this moment because I was hoping we'd see the SSS reunited because we see Tio and Randy here. We have 2 of the 4, technically like 6 pieces here. We're just so close, but CS4 for sure. When we talk to Randy after this scene, it's obvious that this choice hurt him and it made him feel really homesick and lonely, which, man. He talks to Reen about Lloyd for a bit and then fills him in on how he's perceived by the people of Crossbell. He as in Reen, by the way. Reen believes that he might be vilified by Crossbellians, but Randy tells him that most Crossbellians actually like Reen despite his position. Again, I love finally having a perspective on what the people of Crossbell are thinking in their own words. I feel like the perspective was missing in Cold Steel 1 and 2. Also, something that I really appreciate is that each of the new Class 7 members consistently get developed between missions and outside of bonding events. Kurt, Yuna, and Altina all voice their individual concerns of going to Crossbell considering their background, and they even follow up their thoughts on the royal family members when we get to talk to them. If this were the old Class 7, most of the class members would probably have generic or group dialogue here. The next morning, the train goes through Crossbell City, which, let's go, and we see Celine watching over the train, which had to be curious, but then it pans out to Campanella disguised as a station worker, which really had me curious. At this moment, I knew that something terrible was about to happen in Crossbell. If we see any Ouroboros members doing anything, something's about to go down. And plus, the chapter title is called Conflict in Crossbell, so it's about to get really bad. I loved how Yuna started pushing herself to become the authority of the group once we actually started heading to Crossbell. I thought this was really cute and it added a lot to her character. But something that really, immensely disappointed me was that the road themes from the Crossbell games don't play here. Like, how did they not do that? But to flip the chessboard a little bit, I do understand why they wouldn't use the exact same road theme here. The context, tone, and perspective that we're visiting Crossbell in is completely different from when we were playing it in Trails of Zero and Azure, so I understand why the theme is not the same. Still disappointed though. Before we're allowed to explore Crossbell, the party has to talk to Governor General Rufus, which is a title. Crossbell is a city. I didn't mean to say it like that. But on the elevator ride down, Yuna brings up the SSS, but more specifically Lloyd. Reen points out that Lloyd is considered a fugitive to Crossbell, and Kurt states his perspective on it as an Erebonian, pretty much insinuating that Lloyd deserved what happened to him. Yuna being the ride or die that she is for Crossbell and the SSS, she steps in and corrects him, saying that he's not a criminal but a hero and that he'll come back to liberate Crossbell. Altina and Reen chime in saying that Lloyd is just some guy and that he doesn't seem like a hero or a dangerous fugitive, but that he was potentially stronger than him, which also in turn reveals to Yuna and Kurt that Reen and Altina fought Lloyd at the end of CS2. I love that after they back her up, she's like, y'all see it, bro? Look, that's my goat right there, Lloyd, you already know. As I've been saying, I love seeing these characters sharing their opinions and thoughts on different countries and people, so I ate this scene up. Machias comes through after the elevator ride, so let me just talk about him here. I did not like Machias in the first Cold Steel game because of his personality, but by the second and especially this game, I understood that it was part of his character development, and Machias grew to be pretty mature, and I really appreciated his character in this game, and especially his S-Craft. Probably the best S-Craft in the series, not even gonna lie. That's Big Mach right there, look at that. We're funneled into the Harbor District at this point, and at first I was disappointed that the game was restricting exploration of Crossbell, but in retrospect I really appreciated it, because I think if they opened up Crossbell right off the bat, I would have had sensory overload and trying to find everything and everyone, and I would have burned myself out really hard, so I'm glad that they limited like this. I was also initially disappointed that we only get to see half of Crossbell in the entirety of CS3, but again, I'm actually glad that they did that, because that would have just opened up so many NPCs that you would have had to talk to every time you came back here in this chapter. So I was fine with it. The first thing I did when they gave me control was run straight to the Hayu trading building, which was burned down in Azure, only to find that it was replaced by a radio station, which didn't surprise me, but at the same time it kind of did. Azel from the Testaments group was also working a new job here, which I love seeing too. Now, I'm not going to sit here and talk about every character from Crossbell, but I gotta give a shout out to a few characters in particular. Mimi is still here, where we see her in Crossbell waiting for the special sports section to return home, and I thought that was just beautiful. Ryu and his friends created the Junior SSS to hold down the fort in the SSS's absence. That's a mouthful. Patery, Machias' childhood friends from Ost, is working in the general store, which ended up having what I consider to be some of the funniest dialogue in the entire series. We also get to meet Yuna's family for the first time, which was extremely cute. I love this scene. When the party meets Tio for the first time, man, you best believe I was smiling. I love how Yuna just goes full fangirl here when she's talking to Tio, like she's talking about her favorite artist or something, like she's Michael Jackson. And I also noticed that Tio's really just grown since Azure, from the way she talks, along with the fact that she smiles a lot more. I love that for baby girl. I love that. She eventually takes us down to the Geo front, and I immediately checked to see if Tio was playable, which she wasn't, and I was like, oh man, oh well. But when we go down the elevator, she's like, hold on, let me pull out this orbital stab. Never mind, psych, unplayable. And I was like, let's go! This is where the eternal Cold Steel 3 conundrum came into play. At this point, we only have 5 party members, and I was already having trouble figuring out who to bench. Most of the game ended up being Altina, unfortunately, as much as I love her, but I just absolutely fear for my party management skills in CS4 just off of this alone, because I know I'm already struggling just knowing who's going to show up at that point. By the end of the dungeon, we fight the boss, and as usual, Reen tries to call Valimar, but somebody yells out, "That won't be necessary," and Elisa and Sharon step in. This running joke, I guess you can call it, always made me laugh, even if it was pretty predictable, just as a subversion of what they did in Cold Steel 1 and 2. Now, I'm not one to get mad over a canon romantic option or anything, I don't really care about all that, but it's pretty clear that Elisa is the one after this scene. And I'm not tripping because, like, I like Toa, the real best girl. And also, Kurt saying, her too? Killed me. It just absolutely killed me because Kurt's like, damn, bro, you ain't gonna say nothing for the rest of us? Like, following this scene, we get to see a bunch of character interactions that I absolutely loved. First, we see Tita and Elisa meeting for the first time, and we learn that their grandparents knew and collaborated with each other. Then we get to see Tio and Randy reunite, which just deserved a standing ovation. The high five or just the dialogue, it's just... this is what this is all about, man. The CS3, bro. After we discover the Pleroma grass, Sharon tells Reen her backstory and how she became involved in Ouroboros in the Reinford group, and how she got Elisa's father killed. So this is where I got crossed up. So I always said since CS1 that Elisa's dad was actually Gideon or G, but here they said that Elisa's father died on top of Gideon dying, quote unquote, in CS2 as well. So this scene made me put that theory to rest just because I felt like I was overthinking it. I'll get back to this point later, but I really enjoyed this scene. The group discusses the appearance of the Pleroma grass, which brings up the topic of the Zero Child and Lloyd. When they name drop Kia, they call her Kia Bannings, which is a little detail that made me happy since that means that Lloyd legally adopted her after Azure. I'm glad that they didn't just outright tell us this and they let us discover it this way through this dialogue. Randy and Tio seem noticeably quiet in the scene too, which made me really wonder where the two of them were at and why they couldn't speak on it. Outside, a few notable people show up in Crossbell. Elise, the royal family, and most importantly, Vita. This means that most of Ouroboros is on standby in Crossbow, which could not be good, but had me excited for the end of the chapter. But then after this, we see a familiar figure atop the SSS building. And as I said before, I had expectations for CS3, but I did know that Crow would come back, so this didn't really surprise me, but I definitely didn't expect them to bring him back this way, this early on in the game. Yuna and Kurt mentioned that Speaker McDowell was noticeably absent from that arrival, which made me realize that CS3 hasn't even mentioned Ellie at all up until this point. And I actually counted throughout the entire game, and they only name drop her like twice, and I feel really bad for Ellie fans. Hey, so this is my second pass of editing right now. It's May 30th, I'm just now realizing this, but Lugman is right here, right before this part of the game, and I didn't even realize it until like my second pass through of editing, which is crazy. Wow. We eventually fight Campanella, and Reen is blocked for summoning Valimar, so he uses his spirit unification to fight. Remember that Reen is supposed to be holding back his power now after the events of CS2. Reen overdoes it and tries to sacrifice himself again for his students, and is saved by Emma and Celine, who gives him a charm to balance out his power. Now I want to ask what y'all think of this scene. So how do y'all feel about Reen not learning his lesson after the events of CS1 and 2 and regressing on his self-sacrificial nature? Because like I've always thought of his nature as a core part of his character development, so it makes sense, but it's a little frustrating to see that he never actually puts himself first, because there's been multiple scenes where he just accepts that he needs to stop doing this, but he continues to do it anyway. So how do y'all feel about Reen just continually sacrificing himself even though people are like, stop doing that? Later that night, the class is tasked with providing security to the events happening in Orcus Tower. This leads to a conversation with the new Class 7, Tita, Carl Regnitz, and Arena. Here, the Empire's 8 Metropolis plan, which is a plan to create the core of the new Empire, is revealed to the party. I like this because it gave some more economic and political world building to the story, but here it's also revealed that Erebonia is mobilizing cannons that are stronger than the ones that were fired in Cold Steel 1 all around the country, and that Arena has no issue with building them since she was just ordered to. Olivier, Alphen, and Elise show up and speak with the party, which I loved, mainly because we get to see Tita and Olivier interact after the events of the Sky trilogy. Once again, this is what Cold Steel 3 is all about. We get to see Olivier show a bit of his Oliver personality again, which was amazing. Rufus and Reen talk here too, and he tells Reen about how he became an Ironblood, which was good. But as usual, it's one step forward, 2 steps back with these people. So he tells Reen about how he became an Ironblood, but then he refuses to elaborate on the Phantasmal Blaze plan and leaves the scene, as usual, which I wasn't surprised about at this point. We see Muse speaking to Alphen and Elise in the stairwell, where it's revealed that Muse attended St. Estraya with the 2 of them, and that she's acting under an alias at the military academy. I still didn't know what to think of her at this point, but I still think that it's very suspicious, even as I'm recording this. After this, Reen senses McBurn's presence again, just like he did at the intermission of CS2, and he and Sharon rush to the top of Orcus Tower. I like how the party splitting up allowed for Ash and Muse to join the party here. We're met with McBurn and Campanella at the top of Orcus Tower, which is intimidating in itself, but also probably the most annoying possible combination for an Ouroboros boss fight. And here we get to see a pretty big revelation for the Sky arc. Sharon reveals that she was the one that helped Ouroboros stop Sarah from showing up during the Gospel Plan attack in Liberal by attacking the now defunct Bracer Guild branch in Erebonia. This event is also why Cassius left during the events of Trails in the Sky, so there was so much information revealed here in that one scene. After the fights, everyone shows up and Olivier stops McBurn and Campanella from just running away after the fight as usual to ask questions. I really like this because this is something that was starting to become really repetitive in the series at this point, so I'm glad that Olivier called them out on this. Olivier points out the holes and key figures in their plan, and McBurn and Campanella are like,
"Yo, he know too much,"
and summon an Aeon straight out of Xenogears on top of the tower. After this, they're like, "You might be right," and they try to leave again, but Yuna steps in to talk her shit on behalf of the special support section and Crossbow as a whole. I love this for her, because this is the most Lloyd ass speech that she probably could have gave, but she gave her own flair on it as well. Great character moment for her. This speech also reveals that the remaining SSS affiliates are being held captive on Michelin, which is the amusement park, which absolutely crushes Yuna. This leads her to beg Reen, the figure who technically caused all this, to give her back her home. This is one of the best scenes in the game, in my opinion. The next day, Reen and the old Class 7 members set out to follow orders given to them by Lecter and the Empire. This time, Reen doesn't stop the new Class 7 members from coming along with them, but the problem here is that Yuna is too depressed from the last scene to function, so Kurt and Altina decide to stay behind and look after Yuna. I like the way the writers justified using the old Class 7 members this time while still developing the new Class 7 members. From here, we entered the SSS building for the first time in this game, and man, it made me so nostalgic. And seeing the picture of the SSS in Lloyd's room, oh my god, that was amazing scene, amazing scene. The direction of this next scene was phenomenally executed in my opinion. The conversation between Kurt, Altina, and Yuna in the train is broken up based on Reen's party progression in the story over the span of about an hour, which sounds like bad pacing, but it works out beautifully. This conversation covers the relation and perception of Crossbow in the eyes of an Erebonian as well as Reen as a teacher. So as we're watching these cutscenes and getting context on these topics over time, we as the player are actually able to go and see what they're talking about firsthand. So hopefully this makes sense as I talk about the conversation itself. When Kurt and Altina go and check up on Yuna, they attempt to sympathize with her by sharing their own experiences. Kurt does this by telling her that he didn't know a thing about Crossbell before this week, and that he believed that Crossbell's citizens would be relieved to be annexed into a country as powerful as Erebonia. Now that he's seen the devastation firsthand, he wants Yuna to know that he understands and sympathizes with Crossbell better now. Again, I'm gonna say this every time it comes up, I love that we're getting multiple perspectives of other regions and cultures in CS3. Yuna fills them in on the political situation between Erebonia and Calvard in regards to the occupation of Crossbell and what she and her family had to go through as a result of this. This is where it's fully revealed that Reen saved Yuna and her siblings, which is why Yuna's always been so conflicted when it comes to Reen and Erebonia. She just wanted Reen to acknowledge her. Altina and Kurt admit that they also want Reen to acknowledge them as well, which is followed by Altina playing a message from Reen to Yuna saying that she needs to be the one to protect Crossbell in the absence of the SSS. This is where the conversation lines up with the present, and you can actually physically go to the door and hear Altina playing the message for Yuna outside of the room. This was a great scene overall, and hands down one of my favorites in the entire game. Later, Olivier shows up to the party's discussion with Tio, donning his Oliver persona once again to join the party. But now that I think about it, this is actually the last time he dons that persona, which is morbid. But at this point, I spent like the next 40 minutes walking around Crossbell to talk with everyone as Oliver. The dialogue here was great, and I love seeing Oliver once again after like what, it would have been 10 years at this point since the last game he was in. But where he really shines is when you leave Crossbell and Lecter shows up. Here, Oliver tells Lecter to relay a message to Osborne and Rufus, and he basically says that if any funny shit goes down, he'll repeat the event that happened in his return to the Empire Star Door in Trails the Third. Best Trails game, by the way. When we get to Stargazer's tower, we get to see Crow lurking above the party once again. Once we actually reach the top of the tower, we see that all the books that were here in the Crossbow games are just gone. I actually don't know who could have taken it, but maybe I'm not thinking hard enough about it. Vita shows up atop the tower, and it's revealed that her grandmother is the Grandmaster of Ouroboros, and by this point, I've pieced together that Rosalina, maybe before this, I pieced together that she was actually their grandmother, and that she was the Grandmaster of Ouroboros. Because I knew that the Grandmaster was female from Trails the Third, like just the voice lines in Trails the Third. And I kind of pieced that together from that. Crow shows up as well and introduces himself as the Azure Siegfried, and that he's working in lieu of the Chief of the Gnomes. So side note, I'll say here that I didn't read the novels and Cold Steel games this time around after doing it religiously for the rest of the series, and I kind of regret it because these novels were probably the most important novels to read in the series in order to understand everything with the witches and the gnomes and all that, and I was really lost with all the terms they were throwing around. Crow reveals that he has his own ghost Aeon, and he flies away followed by Vita. So, big surprise, they let Vita go again, but she does say something interesting that I didn't pick up on the first time I played through. She mentions the fairy tale that tells the end of the world, which is a reference to the ending card of the game, which I definitely didn't pick up on. This leads to the party leaving Crossbell, and thus the end of the chapter. There were a ton of great character interactions in this scene, but the best one was done at the very end with zero dialogue. Randy, Toa, Reen, and New Class 7 are just talking in the train when suddenly Toa spots something outside the window. She immediately jumps up and calls for Randy, Yuna, and Reen to look out the window where they see Arios, Kia, and Lloyd himself free from the shackles of the birdcage. Lloyd puts out a fist to Reen, and Reen puts one out back, and at this point I had no words. Like, my jaw dropped, and I remember just, yeah, like as usual, you already know. And I think the only word that I said was wow. I run the VOD back, I don't remember what I said, I'm not looking back on it, but I was blown away by this scene. This is an amazing way to end the chapter. But it also raised so many questions because this was also the last time that we actually see Lloyd in CS3, so like, what was he doing? What did he do after this? Chapter 3 is where I would say the actual plot of Cold Steel 3 starts to develop. Looking back on it now, I would say that most of the plot of Cold Steel 3 was just fan service leading up to this point, and I still think that Cold Steel 3 is primarily fan service and not much of the plot actually progressed until the later half of this game. But to be fair, this is a setup game in the Trails franchise, so this is no different from Trails in the Sky FC, Trails from Zero, or Cold Steel 1. I love how Eustace and Milliam's relationship has developed since Cold Steel 2. We also get to see Gaius here for the first time since he's been MIA from everyone since Cold Steel 2. In the next scene, we get to see a battle between the Red Constellation and Zephyr, and I really like this scene because I like seeing villains interacting with each other. It gives them a lot more depth and personality, but also we get to see a scene with Rutger and Sarah where Rutger basically just thanks Sarah for raising Fee, and I really like that because one, it shows just how cunning he is and how aware of his surroundings he is because she was hiding from him the whole time, but also it just says a lot about his personality. We see Ouroboros and the Stall Ritter checking out the statues in the mountain similar to the ones we see in Nord, but then Campanella shows up, which had me like, okay, we're coming back here again with all these big names, and then Arianrod shows up on top of that, which immediately just told me again that some shit was going down at the end of this chapter. That wasn't the end of it though. She ends up summoning her own Divine Knight, which is just straight up unfair because she definitely doesn't need that. I knew going into Cold Steel 3 that we would fight Arianrod again, but seeing her get this on top of how difficult the Trails to Azure fight was just had me scared because like she has a Divine Knight now. That's gonna be impossible. When we go back to Thor's, Ashe and Muse joined Class 7, which was a nice parallel to Crow and Millium joining in the first game. But I felt like this development was kind of spoiled by the prologue, but I'm sure I would have eventually figured out that they joined regardless, so I'm not sure then. There's a scene between Celine and Reen that tells the details of the Hexen clan's history, but specifically the relationship between Emma, Vita, and the Grandmaster of Ouroboros. Y'all know how I feel about the writers of Emma and Celine as characters, but I really felt that it was weird that Celine is the one that's giving Emma's backstory without her even being present. They still have Celine replacing half of Emma's character, which I really don't like. The next day, the party arrives at Naval Fortress, and as soon as I saw this, I realized that this is where the game most likely looped back into the prologue, considering what we just saw at the start of the chapter. I also recognize that this is most likely where we're going to fight Arianrod, which had me nervous and excited at the same time. We eventually reach Ortis and meet Muse's family, and then Raquel, where we meet Ashe's family. We also see Angelica here as well. I think more so than any other character we've ever played as in the Cold Steel series, going to Raquel with Ashe really just tells us so much about his character and personality. Almost everyone we interacted with here had something to say about Ashe, whether it was positive or negative, but mostly positive. Later, when Sarah and Angelica join the party, it's revealed that Sarah knew Ashe during the Civil War as the leader of a gang called Fafnir. This one section just exposed so much about Ashe's character, which I loved, and in retrospect, it was important that he got the most development here considering what happens at the end of the game. Speaking of Angelica, I wish that the writers toned down her trope a little bit more, because like I said in my CS2 video, she's a really good character when they actually let her be one, and she's really important to the plot in this game as well. I love the scene in Nighttime Raquel where Reen, Claire, Angelica, and Sarah were together. This segment of the chapter gave some character interactions to characters that we rarely see together anymore, and it also builds up Reen's harem. It also gave me one of the most relatable characters in the series, if you know what I'm saying, just me personally. Reen's nightlife harem getaway is followed by what I consider to be one of the best backstories in the Cold Steel arc so far. Reen finds Sarah alone having a drink at the bar on the train, and Sarah asks Reen if he wants to have a drink with her, as she's always half jokingly, half seriously said since Cold Steel 1, except this time Reen finally accepts. That moment alone was enough in terms of payoff for me, but Sarah and Reen finally get to talk as equals here. Sarah tells her backstory to Reen, which pretty much resembles Fee's, and explains why Sarah's always been so sympathetic towards her. This is then followed by Claire's backstory, which I liked to an extent, but it did have some issues. Claire reveals that Michael is her cousin and goes into her background and her reasoning for joining the RMP. Reen steps in and gives his patented Reen talk, and Claire immediately says, "You remind me of my brother," which made me just roll my eyes because that's the last thing you should say to someone. But to make things worse, she goes in for a kiss and says that tonight is the last time that she compares her to her brother, which is just disgusting. Like, why would you say something like that? I thought this was weird and out of place because outside of the end of Cold Steel 2, which I also thought was out of place, Claire has never shown romantic interest in Reen. Even in some of the bonding events, it's platonic if anything. I personally felt like this scene and this romance was forced, especially considering that both her scene and Sarah's scene are required for the player to watch. The next day, we're tasked with tracking down Millium, which leads us to Bryonia. That's hard to say. Bryonia Island. I thought that from a gameplay standpoint, this area was beautiful but very empty. It was more or less the same issue that I had with the Nord Highlands in CS 1 and 2. This eventually leads us to the statue that the Ouroboros members were checking out at the start of the chapter. Here, time freezes and Reen is confronted by the blonde-haired girl again, and she states that Reen was able to see the Draco's memories in Cold Steel 2 because he's highly compatible with them. And she accidentally, quote-unquote, name drops Vita, which reveals the connection between them if it weren't obvious enough at this point. The blonde-haired girl bites Reen, and time starts back up again. Once we reach the Spirit Shrine, Reen finds Millium's pouch and he announces a state of emergency and tells New Class 7 to fall back and let him go in alone, without hesitation, and again, the fact that Reen is still doing this after he said he wouldn't in the last chapter is still kind of frustrating. It's the same kind of people are telling him not to sacrifice himself again, and he's just not processing it. Again, I get that this is part of his character development, but the fact that he tried it again so soon makes no sense to me. But also, Reen is an emotionally driven person, so again, this is part of his character, but it is really frustrating to see this happen again and again and again and again. Inside the Spirit Shrine, we find Millium captured by the Stall Ritter. New Class 7 is worried that they'll hurt her, but Reen steps in with his patented Reen talk, saying that he knows that Duvalie's pride and moral code would never allow her to hurt a hostage, which has them all flustered. Reen out here making psychological moves, man. I love it. After the fight, Arianrod appears, and Reen wastes no time trying to go all out by calling Valimar. Arianrod hits the interception and restrains Valimar like, nah, we gonna scrap 1v5, put that shit away. And Reen justifiably here tries to go all out with his spirit unification. He stands against her here, but eventually begins to succumb to his power, and he, unsurprisingly, is ready to sacrifice himself, saying that it doesn't matter what happens to me, not even 10 minutes after his students told him not to sacrifice himself for the 3rd time in this game. It's so frustrating. It made sense, it was justifiable here, but the fact that this happened 10 minutes after that last scene, it just, I don't know. It was very frustrating to watch this. By this point, Gaius steps in and the Stall Ritter decides to just, as usual, peace out. And we find, the Azure Secret observing the fight, and after some words of warning, he pieces out too, unsurprisingly. We return to the mainland, speak with some political figures, and we're able to participate in the Ortis Summer Festival. I thought that this was weird, kind of Final Fantasy VII, let's go snowboarding pacing, because Reen was literally fighting for his life and he's like, yay, let's go have fun at the summer festival. Like, this dude should be dead by this point. He just fought Arianrod, but whatever. Later that night, Reen finds Ash outside giving intel to Lecter, and instead of scolding him, Reen sees through his bad boy persona and accepts him and all of New Class 7 for who they are, which I thought was beautiful. Because Reen's like, hey, that has nothing to do with me, bro, but don't get me involved. I still love you regardless. The next day, we find that Ouroboros and the Jaeger groups have started a large-scale battle in the area, and the military rushes in to intervene. This leads to pretty much every group and most of their key figures being present in one battle. We have the Red Constellation with Shirley and Randy, the Bracer Guild with Sarah, Toval, and Agate, and Ouroboros with Campanella and McBurn. I enjoyed the character interactions that went down in this scene. We later find out that most of Zephyr, the Northern Jaegers, and the Stall Ritter have occupied the Juno Naval Fortress, so we dip and move over there, leaving them to fight. When we reach the Naval Fortress, we find them defending the entrance along with the Azure Secret, which surprises me. But this battle is so clearly uneven that there's literally no way that Class 7 is winning this fight. So how did they get in? Rutger just lets them in, and even offers backup if they lose against Arianrod after Aurelia steps in. Now, I actually didn't mind this, even if it did feel anticlimactic at first, because Zephyr by nature is just chaotic neutral, and they're like, you're gonna lose anyway, so we'll come through and help you, but, you know, good luck, we got you. I thought that was an interesting approach. I really actually do like that in retrospect. Once we get into the fortress, we're confronted by a cryptid, and before Reen is even able to give instructions, Aurelia steps in and just one-shots it, saying that she'll join the party, and I was like, let's go! And we're able to split off into 2 parties here after this, and you best believe she was on the team after that. There are a few scenes as we progress through the dungeon, but there's really only one that I really enjoyed. We find some Northern Jaegers, which if you remember, Ciri was once a part of, and Aurelia was the one who destroyed their homeland in Northumbria. They're both in our party now. Aurelia stands before them and states, I am the one who destroyed your country. I accept all of your remorse, your shame, and your hatred. Take the head of the Golden Rakshasa, if you can. And this was one of the rawest lines in the series, bro. Like, after she wins, she says that they should just give up and stop fighting for a lost cause. Like, kill yourself now. And they try to just off themselves, and Reen steps in to stop them, and Sarah tries to tell them the same thing Aurelia did, but with a little bit more empathy, like just a little bit more. Overall, this was a great scene and amazing utilization of the characters in this game. I was not expecting this kind of interaction to go down at all when I was playing this game. Following this, we get to see the large-scale battle that we left earlier between the Red Constellation and Ouroboros, which gives us a few character interactions, but I thought it was weird that at the end of the scene, everyone just makes up and leaves again. This is such a huge issue that I have with a lot of major battles in this series. Like, why do they just always laugh everything off and just leave? Like, there's no consequence to any of these large-scale battles. It's just a platform for them to have character interactions. I don't have as big of an issue as I'm making it out to be with this, but it would be cool if a lot of these large-scale battles in the series actually amounted to something instead of just, hey, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you, let's pretend to fight a little bit and then leave. Because nothing happens in these battles. We eventually reach Arianrod at the top of the fortress, and the stage is set for this battle. Based on how difficult the fight in Azure was, I was genuinely worried about the difficulty of this battle, since she had the mech backing her up on top of the entire Stall Ritter backing her up. I barely won this fight, if only for Millium's reflectability, and I have a clip of this on my second channel if you're interested. Shameless plug, but I definitely thought I was going to be stuck on this fight for a long time, and I barely won. Definitely one of the best fights in the series. It was a ton of fun, but I wish that I didn't get carried by Millium. I love Evangelion. At the end of this fight, the party does what they always do at the end of every fight with Ouroboros and asks 15 questions back to back, and like clockwork, Arianrod refuses to elaborate and instead turns around and destroys the Aeon with her Divine Knight, says something vague, and leaves. Once again. Leaves. Following this is a meeting between the four great houses, which is crashed by Muse playing her true role and identity of Duchess Mildine. I honestly wasn't expecting this at all, because I was thinking that Muse was a part of the intelligence division or even Ouroboros. But I guess this makes sense in retrospect because she was talking to Alphen and Elise, so I guess I was looking in the wrong direction with that. Before the chapter ends, we witness a conversation between the Stahlritter and Arianrod, followed by each of the members' backstory and how they joined the Stahlritter. Later, Arianrod and the blonde girl have an interaction that kind of explains some of the goals of Ouroboros, but not really. I really enjoyed both of these scenes overall. But then, probably the most shocking development of the game, if not the entire Cold Steel arc, comes through. Angelica goes to visit Crow's grave with a shovel in hand, and after digging up the grave, to no surprise, she confirms that his body is fake. George, with no E by the way, stands behind her along with a white-haired man with a floating eyeball who tells him to get rid of her. George pulls out a gun, and the chapter ends. This moment just absolutely shocked me, and I had no idea that was coming or what to even think of it. And I also had no idea who the white-haired man was, but in retrospect, they really got me with that, because I completely just ignored the fact that G could have still been alive, like I said earlier. Also, that plot twist of George being a villain made perfect sense, because I remember when I was playing Cold Steel 1 or 2, I looked up George's wiki page for some reason, and I saw that his last name was Gnome, and I was like, that's so stupid, and completely just ignored it until now. But now I'm like, wait, that makes perfect sense now. So they did a great job with this plot twist. You could have foreseen it if you actually paid attention. Chapter 4 begins in Heimdallr, which is never a good sign in a Trails game. And beneath Heimdallr, we see the beginnings of the Scarlet Pleroma grass sprouting again, which is never a good sign in Trails games. So it's about to go down. Once we begin the school day at Thor's, we get to see some of the final bonding events with a few of the new Class 7 members, but there were a few that stood out to me. I loved Altina's final bonding event. Millium gave Altina a toy camera for her to take pictures with, so Reen decides to help out. They go around campus taking a bunch of pictures of people, and by the end, everyone takes a group picture, and we see Altina finally showing her own emotions by smiling, which she might not have realized herself. We find Yuna in the kitchen making Crossbell pretzels, and Yuna reveals that she learned that pretzels actually came from the Empire and that Crossbell put their own unique flair on it to make it their own. She accepted this and wanted to make the pretzels in order to figure out how to solve the issues between Crossbell and the Empire, which really reflects her character development throughout the story. We enter the Einhell Keep again, but this time Tita joins the party. By the end, she tells the party about her promise and relationship with Estelle, Joshua, and specifically Ren, which I absolutely loved because they haven't really been mentioned up until this point in the game as far as I remember. She didn't directly name drop them though, which I thought was interesting. When we return to the campus, we end up having a battle between Victor, Aurelia, Reen, Sarah, Fee, and Laura, which I thought came out of nowhere, but it was a welcome follow-up to the duel between Reen and Victor in the ending of Cold Steel 2. Upon arriving at Heimdallr, we're thrown into a debriefing meeting between Governor Regnitz, the main campus students, and Osborne himself. This was the first time we see Reen and Osborne interact after the events of Cold Steel 2. By this point in the game, I've got the feeling that Osborne isn't necessarily a bad guy like he's been painted since Trails in the Sky. We've been given a more sympathetic view of him since then, and the way he approached the conversation in this scene, he definitely seemed more friendly than usual. I'm not sure yet though. Who knows what's gonna happen. Our main goal in Heimdallr is to capture Calvert agents lurking in the city, which I think kind of leads into one of my biggest takeaways from Cold Steel 3. I had no idea what was going on a macro level at any given point during the events of this game, and for the most part, we as Class 7 are doing missions here and there and then just running into Ouroboros or one of the Jaeger groups along the way. But up until the final events of the game, and even now, I couldn't tell where the plot was going at all. There were so many questions that I had that I didn't get answered. Granted, this is a setup game though. FC0 and CS1 are no different in this regard. I didn't realize I felt this way until I was well into chapter 3, just because I was enjoying the fan service along the way so much. This is by no means a negative for me, but it might be a negative for people that start with the Cold Steel games and don't understand what's going on in terms of fan service, so I thought I'd just point it out. But on the topic of fan service, something that I absolutely need to address in this video is one of the most important scenes in the series. Upon entering Heimdallr for the first time, we're able to meet a group that has been so coveted in my eyes since Cold Steel 1. Upon entering Vesta Street, we're invited to eat with Towa's family, and we're treated to almost 10 minutes of character interaction between Towa, her family, Reen, and new Class 7. I'm not even kidding when I say I've been waiting on this moment since I met Towa. Best girl for real. The party eventually arrives in the catacombs of Heimdallr while chasing some Calvard spies, and Roselia shows herself in front of not just Reen, but the entire Class 7 to open a path for them and then disappears. This is the first time that she's shown herself in front of anyone besides Reen. The party finds themselves at the cemetery where Crow was buried, and Reen tells the new Class 7 his history and relationship with him. In the following scene, Crow's grave is dug up, and they also discover that his body's fake. Later that night, the entirety of the old Class 7 finally reunites at the Bracer Guild. I thought that the build-up across the entire game towards the payoff in this scene was great, with all the party members coming and going throughout the story and finally meeting up here. Also, in retrospect, Milliam's speech here was a pretty obvious death flag that I didn't even think about my first playthrough. It low-key hurts to rewatch this knowing what I know now. But man, damn, rest in peace Milliam, bro. After they all leave, we see the Azure Siegfried and Copper George with no E on a rooftop plotting over the final acts of the game. I had no idea what was going on here at this point. Also, the blonde-haired girl officially name drops herself as Crimson Roselia here. The next day, we go about our usual missions, which eventually leads us beneath a museum, where we find a portal to the Sanctuary of the Dark Dragon, the penultimate dungeon of the game. This dungeon overall included a bunch of new and old Class 7 members as party members and split them into 3 parties, which I enjoyed playing through. I usually don't like when Trails tries to implement puzzles in their dungeons, but I didn't mind this one as much. Once we beat the Dark Dragon, Roselia banishes it, which removes the Pleroma grass in the area. After this, Emma walks up to her grandmother and starts scolding her. As out of character as I thought this scene was, I thought it was hilarious and cute that Roselia, the Grandmaster of Ouroboros, is kind of afraid of her granddaughter, especially considering it's Emma of all people. Overlooking this scene, as usual, is the Azure Siegfried shows up and 1v1s Reen, confirming to him that he's Crow before he, did I even have to say it? Leaves. Big surprise. But something I didn't notice at first was that Ash picks up one of the Calvard agent's guns, which will come up later. The next day, Reen and Olaf Craig have a conversation about Osborn's history in regards to him being Reen's father. I thought that the history being told from Olaf's perspective was a great move. Reen rejects this truth by stating that the only person he can truly call his father is Tio, and that Osborn is monstrous, but that he deserves his respect for saving him from the accident 14 years ago. This scene was a great recap and exposition for Reen's stance and feelings on Osborn before the end of the game, where it gets even more complicated. Following this scene, we're allowed to invite any of the party members to one of the summer festival events, which, as with every Cold Steel game, means that something terrible is about to happen. I enjoyed a ton of these scenes, and I was a little overwhelmed at how many character interactions I would have to go to, since I try to talk to everyone in these games. I won't go through everything here, but I really enjoyed the side missions with Claire and Michael, and the Catacombs mission with all the party members from the previous Trails arcs. I spent a ton of time on that mission just trying to see all the S-Link character interactions, since this is the only time in the game where most of them are available in the same party together. We also get to see Lecter's backstory here, which I was not expecting at all. But it's important because it ties into Ash's backstory as well, and as we see later, Ash is probably one of the most important characters in this game. Later that night, we're invited to the Valflame Palace where a ton, and I do mean a ton, of character interactions happen. There's a lot of dialogues to go through here, and I honestly got burnt out, just because this was immediately followed by the summer festival, so that was just a ton of reading I had to do in the span of like one playthrough. I was about to stop as soon as I saw all this. I feel like some of this dialogue could have been optional, and they could have made the more important ones required, so you didn't have to go through all of this. But this is a Trails game, so I should have expected this, but man, it was a lot to read. Eventually, Reen meets with the Emperor, where it's revealed to Reen that Olivier was born of a commoner and is not officially of noble blood. They have an interesting conversation about the history of Erebonia, but that's really just a setup for the next conversation. Rean finally gets to speak with Osborn one-on-one, where he fully reveals his history and plans leading up to the present day, which I have to commend him for, considering he was just asked a plot-relevant question in the Trails universe. Rean then asks what the Phantasmal Blaze plan even is, to which Osborn reveals is a plan to gain the Septarian. I'm just gonna play a clip of my theory here at the time. They're gonna like use the souls from the old schoolhouse to wake up those two mechs in the rocks or whatever, is what I'm getting from that. They flashed those two together, and then it looks like those two were trying to like resurrect them and then make them fight. That's what I got from that. Just before we get the answers we've been asking for a few games now, Claire interrupts and Osborn excuses himself. Reed asks one last question. How did you survive being shot in the chest? Osborn answers that 14 years ago, when his son was on the verge of death, he gave him his heart and that's why he didn't die. At this point I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And he just leaves. I still don't know what's going on. Later, we find that Ash had snuck into the Emperor's chambers, and Osborn refers to him as the third survivor of Hamel, which is just like, what? Previously, the only two survivors of Hamel had obviously been Joshua and Layaway. The Emperor pretty much allows Ash to kill him to end his suffering, ending the chapter. As I said earlier, Ash being from Hamel in this game in particular was foreshadowed in this game, but there was no way for us to foreshadow this in the other games. I'm not sure how people feel about this key information being retconned into the game, but my stance on this is that the whole point of the story right now is that the history of Hamel is supposed to be covered up. So the fact that the player would never be able to tell this and that we were being told a lie on top of the people in the universe being told this lie makes perfect sense. So I'm not really tripping over this. It actually blew me away and I really enjoyed this plot twist. By this point in the game, once again, I had no idea where the story was going, and I was just on the edge of my seat by the time the 4th chapter ended. News of the incident spread across Heimdall, and the area is put on martial law. And I like how Rean responds to this situation by just completely blaming himself. He feels that he failed Ash as an instructor, to which Toa and Randy comfort him. The Emperor's death placed Osborn and Rufus in direct control of Erebonia, which was most likely according to plan. I will say though that I'd be nervous as the event planner to place Osborn in the exact same position where he was shot in Cold Steel 1. Like, that doesn't seem like a good idea at all. Upon returning to Heimdall, we meet at the church with Rosine, Roselia, and Thomas, who introduces Gaius to the party as the successor of the 8th Dominion. Which, I mean, he probably knows Kevin. Let us know what Kevin's doing, bro. Here we get a backstory of what Gaius was doing since the end of Cold Steel 2. As soon as this was revealed, I immediately made the connection to that super obscure hidden quest during the finale of Cold Steel 2, where we chased down Father Barkhorn. This reveal is one of the best payoffs of this game. Here, Roselia and Thomas explain the creation of the Divine Knights and the creation of Erebonia and Heimdall. This conversation is interrupted by pretty much every single opposing force we met in the game at the Imperial Villa. This includes every single member of Ouroboros, including Sharon, the Stahl Ritter, every leader of the Jaeger forces, Cedric, and every single Intelligence Division member, including Milliam and Altina. This is all revealed to be led by a man named Alberic of the Black Demise, who is the white-haired man we saw with... I'm not even gonna say it, that joke's not funny anymore. Crow, throughout the game. So, by this point in the Cold Steel arc, I had given up on my theory of Elisa's dad being Gideon just because they took so long to confirm it. I made this connection as soon as we saw him in Cold Steel 1, but by Cold Steel 2, when he quote-unquote died without confirmation, I just kind of disregarded it. I remember during this playthrough, I even jokingly said that he was Gideon, and it ended up being true, but by the time they actually confirmed it, I was just like, oh, well, I guess it was true. I guess I was right the whole time, like the past 3 games. Cool. Like, I didn't really feel gratified for that. Also, I forgot to mention, but Vita being on our side now just kind of had me like, okay, cool. Like, I didn't know what to feel about it, but I was just kind of okay with her being there, I guess. We eventually sieged the Imperial Villa, and while there were plenty of good character interactions, the one that stood out to me the most was my girl Toa. You already know. Toa comes face to face with George, with no E, and just goes at him while shot calling with the blicky in hand, and Michael pulls out the rocket launcher to save her. It was like, this scene was so unexpected, but I absolutely loved it. It was hilarious. Once we reach the inside of the final dungeon, the first mini-boss we reach is McBurn and Arianrod combined into one fight, which is intimidating as a first line of defense. It's just telling how important what they're defending is that these two are the ones they put in the front lines. And this Gauntlet style of battles is pretty much the inverse of Cold Steel 2's ending. Here, we get to see the payoff of Laura versus Arianrod and by extension their combat styles, as well as Gaius' true power as the 8th Dominion, which I hope we get to see more of in Cold Steel 4. Next we fight against Sharon, Shirley, Rutger, and Crow, which gives us good interactions and development for Fee, Elisa, and Reen. And by the end, Elisa reveals that she has a mech power-up, which is cool. Next we fight Rufus, Claire, Lecter, and... When we reach the bottom, Alberich and Osborne fill us in on what the Great Twilight is and their motivations. While most of this went over my head the first time I watched this, what I'm pretty much getting from this now is that they want to cleanse Erebonia of its sins and failures by using some kind of curse in the Divine Knights. No idea what's going on, not even going to try to act like I do. After we beat the Nameless One, the final boss of the game, we see a scene of the Courageous flying over everyone with Toval, Olivier, and Victor inside of it. Alberich then detonates the ship, seemingly killing everybody inside of it. Now I have to be completely honest, I did it and still to this day do not believe that they actually killed anybody inside of the ship, even though it was extremely apparent that it blew up with them inside of it, considering how this series treats death. Off the top of my head, I think the only two people that this series has actually killed without a shadow of a doubt is Lei Wei and Vulcan. That's it. They have not killed anybody else as far as I remember. Plus, on top of this, Rutger was pronounced dead as well as Gideon too. So all these people have seemingly come back to life or have been resurrected. Crow too! Like, all these people are coming back to life. So I was like, okay, well, they're just gonna use that same technology or whatever they did to bring everyone in this ship back. So I shouldn't even be sad about this, and I still am not sad about this. I'm gonna just say it here, they're going to come back. At least Olivier. We'll see how well this ages, but there's no way. Now, on the off chance that they actually are permanently dead, I do like the fact that they've killed Olivier, someone who is present in every single arc of the game. He's the most important character that we play as in the game, arguably. So I like the idea that they're killing him off because he is the key figure that links all the games together. What's also interesting is that Aurelia is unsurprised by this. Vita tells her that this is exactly how Lady Mildine or Muse predicted, and that she's the only hand left in the game. This scene alone is a revelation in itself that I didn't process while I was playing through this the first time. Cedric attempts to continue the plan by sacrificing Altina, whose role in this story is revealed to be the sword. As soon as Altina tries to conform to her role, Milliam steps in and takes her place to protect her. Milliam then sacrifices herself to the Nameless One and dies, turning into a sword. This, compared to the other scene, I knew for a fact that Milliam was dead. Come on, man. I believe this one wholeheartedly. She's not coming back. This death genuinely shocked me because we immediately saw the consequences of it. Reen pulls a red Arcuid and goes completely berserk while everyone helplessly watches him. Doing this spreads the curse upon the entirety of Erebonia, which is a skill that we haven't seen in the series up until this point, aside from maybe the Civil War. Crow states, "Why did I have to remember now of all times?" It jumps down to restrain him, followed by each of the wielders of the Divine Knights. As he watches everything go according to plan, Osborne states, "Together, we shall write the end to this wretched fairy tale, in ink, black as despair." And the game ends. This was the biggest cliffhanger ending in the series after Trails in the Sky, maybe even more so than Trails in the Sky. And I think that the shock of everything that happened made me feel just empty inside. My initial reaction was just straight confusion, and I didn't want to dive immediately into the next game like I did with FC. Like, I kind of wanted to just marinate on it because I felt empty. I didn't know what to think. I still don't know what to think as I'm recording this right now, almost 4 months later. But watching this back now while writing and editing the video the past few months just has me wanting to play it even more. Because, like, I need to know what happens. I have no idea what's going to happen in Cold Steel 4. The final panel of the game shows Valimar chained up with an expanded version of Osborne's closing words. And that's it. That's the end of Trails of Cold Steel 3. So my overall thoughts on Cold Steel 3, I would say that this is probably ranked as my third or fourth favorite game, and I don't think it's recency bias because I've been away from this for about 4 months now. As y'all know, I don't really follow the community, so I don't know what the general reception of this game is. But something I could see people saying and criticizing this game for is that the actual plot doesn't really move on until the end of the game, and most of it is really just fan service for people who've played the previous games. So anyone who started with Trails of Cold Steel and then went to Trails of Cold Steel 3 would probably be lost and find this game really boring, because 90% of it was just interactions with different characters. I love that personally, and I really like that about this game, so it didn't bother me, but I could see why people would say that. As for my predictions for Cold Steel 4, I literally don't know anything except the fact that we're gonna meet Estelle, Joshua, Ren, all of them. That's all I know. I could give some theories, but I kind of already gave that in the video. I don't know what's gonna happen. I genuinely have no idea. I am completely lost in terms of plot, but I'm thoroughly looking forward to Cold Steel 4 because, like, that is going to be a good game right there. Cool. Hey, welcome to the end of the video, where I beg you to please like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff for the video because I need it. This is a very difficult video to justify spending so much time on making. I've been editing this video since February, like early February. After I finished the game, I pretty much started writing and editing the script, and it has been very hard. It is June 4th right now as I'm recording this. I just finished the video an hour ago, 30 minutes ago, I don't even know. It's been a really long process. My process has sucked. I'm gonna change it for the Cold Steel 4 video. These videos don't do good with algorithms, so if you like Cold Steel or Trails or anything like that, share this with someone else who does. Put it on Reddit or something maybe, I don't know. I'm gonna do it. I don't really know what's gonna happen, but thank you for watching the video. Thank you for spending time watching this video. It's been very difficult, and hopefully Cold Steel 4 is a good game and I get a good video out of it. I'm moving around a lot.